Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Amina. I'm the head of partnerships here at SwissNext. I would like to say a few words to welcome you to a space, telling you where you are. How many people have been to SwissNext before? Okay, so most of you, great. So first of all, thank you for coming. I know we have two big art fairs opening in San Francisco today, so I'm glad that you chose this instead. This is a topic that's really dear to our heart here at SwissNext, so we're really excited to collaborate with the Hive on this. When you think about robotics, AI, machine learning, automation, all that, of course there's the aspect of exponential technologies, but from our perspective, what's really interesting and important to talk about, which is why we're excited about this panel today, is really how does that affect wider society? How does that affect how we work, how we organize our lives, how we organize our built environment, and actually how we add value as human beings? So that's obviously a big question. There's a fear of automation replacing jobs, but there's also an opportunity to change how we learn and how we interact and how we collaborate, both from creating new policies around work and learning or education, but also between people, between organizations, institutions, and between countries. And so this is really something that SwissNext stands for in a way. So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are, why we exist. So SwissNext is an initiative of the Swiss government. We're public-private, partially funded by the Swiss government, but not for the most part. We're part of a global network. And so we're two SwissNexts in San Francisco. We have two in Asia, and the newest one is Rio in Brazil. And this is really a global network for education, research, and innovation to connect Switzerland and those different innovation locations. Here in San Francisco, we're the biggest SwissNext. We're really, with this new space that we've been in for 2.5 years, we're really creating a living lab and an innovation launchpad. We work with very many different diverse organizations, both Swiss and local. with startups and entrepreneurs, universities, research labs, the creative community, corporates and enterprises, of course, with thought leaders, policymakers, think tanks, foundations, and nonprofits. And the idea is really to bring interdisciplinary collaboration here to San Francisco. We have a wide range of different partners that we work with, both here in our space, whether they're startups that participate in our startup programs, residents that co-work here with us, corporates that come here and participate in our innovation services, but also a wider community back in Switzerland of partners that we work with, whether they're universities, startups, ecosystem partners. And of course, we benefit very much from having a great local network of collaborators and partners. Here in this space at SwissNax San Francisco, and really relevant to today's discussion about robots, future of work, and society at large, we're really trying to build a living lab around different components. The first component is really space, so we're really trying with the space to build a place for experimentation and prototyping with our diverse partners. We're creating an innovation community that collaborates and co-creates together. And why are we doing this? We're doing this to create shared value and impact, both for Switzerland, of course, but our collaborators globally and locally. This topic is really timely for us, which is why we're super excited to have it. We've been looking at different aspects of future of work, impact for technology, but also the topic of digital fabrication for many years. We had last year a whole event series and actually a research program dedicated to studying the impact of technologies on society, which was a 3-month event series that we did in collaboration with both research partners, universities, but also corporates and startups. The event series itself is done, but we're actually aiming to publish some insights from that as well in the coming months. Then also for the past 2+ years we've had informal collaborations with local partners around the topic of future of work, both related to how you build a collaboration space, but also ongoing topics like, how does future of work change education, for example, and how does it change, how you organize cities, for example. And so this is a workshop series that we've done together with our Foresight and the Deloitte Center for the Edge. They're free, so if we have any coming up, you're all invited as well. And now we have 2 projects coming up that are probably interesting to most of you here, specifically around digital fabrication. We'll be hosting a panel on digital fabrication with Matthias Gola, who is a star architect and really one of the leaders in terms of research around digital fabrication, and Christoph Gemann, who is the global head of Foresight at Arup. The following week, we also are opening an exhibition here with Gramazio and Kohler on digital fabrication. This is specifically based on the research that has come out of Switzerland of the National Competence Center for Digital Fabrication, which is a multidisciplinary research initiative between different universities and research centers on the different aspects of digital fabrication, so really all the way from material science to how you would implement this as a practitioner in the construction industry. And we're bringing here an exhibition around the DFAB House, which is a model for digital fabrication that opens this spring in Switzerland. So you'll hear about these events if you're interested in this topic. And I'd like to introduce Ravina, who has collaborated with us on this event. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Emily. Partnering with SwissNax, I think it's been a long time. The last event we did was the chairman of the Stanford D School, Bernie Roth. We had a colleague, Pashu, who used to do a lot of things with SwissNax. We need to get that going. you know the Hive? Heard of the Hive? Good. Hey, we were able to bring some people into SwissNets. Thank you all for coming, and then I have my wife and a bunch of friends here also. So the Hive is an early stage venture capital fund. We focus on AI and primarily applications and use cases of AI in the enterprise. So my colleagues, Maddie here and our CTO Mohan are around. So if you have any questions, come up to any one of us. We are early stage venture capital fund, so we collaborate closely with entrepreneurs, work very closely with them for the first 15, 18 months. So we not just put money in the company, but we really kind of try to drive momentum in these companies. And we're based in Palo Alto, and we have separate entities in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in Bangalore, India, and hopefully in Malaysia. There's a whole set of people here from Khazanah, so welcome, folks. The Hive think tank is a thought leadership forum, and so it consists of event forum, where event platform, where we do events every other week. We have physically touched more than 10,000 people since we started this. And we have a virtual community, a kind of a digital content platform. So I encourage you to check our meetup page and our Medium page. And so we kind of section this into different tracks, and we have various corporate sponsors involved for different tracks. So for example, 5G, Verizon is sponsoring this track, and so we have different sponsors involved in different tracks. And so those are some of the more active corporate sponsors of the Hive think tank. And the reason they're involved with us is they want to participate in this forum, which brings together sort of entrepreneurs, corporations, and partners. Today we all hear about what's going on with Facebook and so forth. Everywhere we go, there are cameras. What's missing in this picture? People. I've talked about kind of the issue. Humans and robots will kind of collaborate, and all kinds of other ethical issues around weaponization of robots that go rogue, the opaqueness around the controls and the AI and so forth. We may not get to chat about all of these things. And so on the other end is kind of robot rights and robot consciousness and rules for robots. And so I hope one of you will ask a question around that. So I encourage you to tweet, and the hashtag is HiveData. And with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Marta Bolash. Thank you.
I never use my last name.
And so I've known her since, so she's been in venture capital for some time. I've known her since she was at Canaan Partners, and she's been at Draper Fisher, and more recently at Rich. But one notable thing, one title she had that's more exciting than all of this is that at Canaan she had 2 titles. The second one was Chief Yoga Officer. So I'll hand it over to Marta, who can then introduce the panel. I think what you want to do today is make it interactive.
Absolutely.
So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and either Maggie or myself will kind of run mics.
Thank you so much, Robbie. And thank you, crowd, for coming here, and thank you, SwissNets. I want to talk just briefly about the origin of this event. So Robbie had called me because I had written some kind of clever tweet, or at least I thought it was. And he said, I want to do a robotics panel. And I said, that's great. I just met this awesome woman, Cynthia. And I said, let me get her on the panel. And so then Robbie said, well, we'll get a bunch of women on the panel. How about that? And I said, great. So I asked Cynthia, and lo and behold, I find Tessa and Erin, and I know Joanne. And I tell people I have this event with 4 women in robotics. And everyone says, how is that possible? Is what I asked a woman. So in this whole world of there are no women in technology, there are plenty. I think all of these women can come up with even more women in case you need more women in robotics on the panel. So I know this is a loaded topic. There's a lot of sensational elements around robotics, and Robbie and just talked about it. What I want today, I don't know if I'll be able to cover everything, is for the crowd to be very interactive. We're not sure exactly what you're interested in, whether it's the jobs or the robot overlords that are going to take us over. Tessa Lau, who's a chief robot whisperer in her prior life and a co-founder. Left is a rocket scientist turned healthcare executive who works at a VC fund whose mission is because the human condition.
So before I start, just a quick show of hands, just so that we can sort of better cater our answers to the crowd. How many of you are engineers? Finance. Specifically. Okay, it's a good mix. All right. Well, my name is Cynthia. It's series. There is a particular character called Susan Calvin. Does any ring a bell to anyone? I see. I am not a misanthrope. I love people. I get exhausted by them, but I do love people. But it was just incredibly inspiring to see, this sort of like very prominent female heroine in, this sort of like science fiction series that is described as, intelligent. So, throughout my entire life, always been interested in science and technology. Prior to my current role at Cafe X, which is a robotic coffee bar, if none of you guys have gone, please go. We have 3 locations. For their sort of next-gen solutions, SoftBank Robotics, if you guys aren't aware, is a sort of multi-billion-dollar company. I don't know how much money we have. Single robotics article that you're going to see on the news, because whenever people write about
Twitter, that's not necessarily a plug, but there's a story behind it, and somewhat how I got into robotics. I just had a really easy time growing out with them, and felt like did grad school, and then when I moved to Silicon Valley, I couldn't, what really drives me nuts nobody ever wanted. So this was 2010, and I'm realizing just how rampant an issue this is, because I'm in robotics because these are systems that can solve problems for real people. Two types of articles were articles I never posted. One was the robot steal jobs article, and the other one was, hey, this is a cool robot article. I did not post those. I wanted to I kind of know a little bit of history from what happened the past 10 years. And I can say robots can help solve a lot of problems, and they still have a lot of potential. I got my PhD. Great career as a researcher there. I thought I would try her. Around something different to do because I kind of plateaued, and I was trying to figure out what else I wanted to do with my life, kind of like a midlife crisis. And I never worked on robots before. Didn't a partner, a quadriplegic, his name is Henry Evans, who because he couldn't do that, or feed himself, or save himself, or just take care of. That if you ever stay in a hotel and you get hungry at midnight, you can call down to the front desk.
Hello, my name is Joanne Hibbert. Inject itself as project-based learning for high school, grade school. Opportunity to watch the evolution of robotics enter into education and break down walls.
my older brother. So I go back to what is the definition of a robot, because it comes in different shapes and sizes. So Tessa, what's a robot?
I get this question a lot. I think a robot is, so in robotics there's the saying, sense, think, act, right? So you have a robot that can see, so they have some kind of sensors, they have a brain so that they can reason about the world, and they have that have those properties. I think, and I actually cast the definition of robotics more broadly than most, because most people picture a humanoid, you know, two-armed, two-legged robot, but there's a lot of technology in our world which senses the temperature of your room and turns the heat up or down depending on whether you're hot or cold, to a dishwasher, which, you know, cleans your dishes for you. I actually a very broad term that describes a lot of the things that we're already seeing now.
Karen, do you agree?
Opposite. I have a to affect the physical world. But on the flip side, the cynical definition is or warehouse automation or system. So actually building.
Once it has a name, it's no longer a robot. Once the technology actually works, it's no longer AI. Like Google search, it was
Anything to add on there? Good, I'm going to cue you up for the next thing. So I work in media. It's really interesting to see what they want. So I wanted to pull some headlines so you can understand how sensational this topic has gotten. And children trust robots even when they're wrong. Study. So the generational perspective, how do generations see robotics? And so you've seen it through education as well as healthcare. Can you elaborate on where you're seeing biases or fear?
Well, on terms of the biases, I think the technology has moved along so far in the years that I've been in my engineering career that the has gotten to the level that any garage level person, and in fact, will do certain actions. Mastery of what it can do, the fear drops way down. I think the mentors that get involved in robots have more hesitation about what they can do. But they have that sense of reality because they need to know that it's going to turn into something that works. It's not going to go up there, sit stable, never move. It's an interesting gap that still exists. There's no doubt about it. It still exists. The students, the youth are the idealists, the elders are the pragmatists. Somehow
Robotics.
so baby boomers don't fear that robotics, but it's interesting. They don't fear it, and it's because they get more control of healthcare. There's a lot of wearable technology now that one can begin to master their own health data, their own status of their own health. I'm wearing one myself. I have a Garmin that can tell me my heart rate. I have a device in my wallet that gives me my EKG, we get respiration. And when that kind of technology is offered to an elderly person and they get that, and they get control of that, they love it. They absolutely love it. They have no fear of it because they know that it's there to help them. So their adoption is fast.
It's become a product. Do you have any other thoughts on generational perspectives of robotics? Because I think that's a lot around the social implications.
I mean, it's really interesting running a robotic coffee chain because you do see people of all ages and demographics, every single day at, one of our 3 locations. And at least for us, we do see like slightly different reactions to, what we're offering depending on the type of person. So there's definitely a certain demographic where they've seen this, they know how to order, like they don't even look at it, it's not interesting to them. And then there's definitely people who just stare at it they'll just stand there for an entire hour, watching the robot arm, take a cup, into the machine, circles around, wave, and they love it. They'll take photos, they bring their friends over the next day, and so it's just really interesting to see this huge divergence in the reactions to it. I do think that the very, very young and the very, very old tend to react the strongest, and then the sort of 20, 30-year-olds tend to be a little bit more blasé about the whole thing.
I've seen I've been spending a lot of time in the construction industry. So I've been talking to a lot of construction people, and they span the generations. The interesting thing about construction is that they're family-owned businesses. So you have, the grandfather who launched this business 60 years ago, and then he passed it on to the dad, who passed it on to the son. And the challenge, one of the reasons it's hard to get technology into this industry is because they do things the same way. Right? They've been doing things the same way in construction for more than 50 years. That's both a blessing and a curse. It's hard to break in because they have all this tradition, but it's also an opportunity to actually do things better with the new technology that's becoming available. And I see different reactions to technology in these different generations because I'm talking to all of them. And the old guys, they're kind of more conservative, but and the young guys are obviously digital natives, and so they grow up with iPhones, and they know they have a Roomba and they drive a Tesla. They know technology is coming. But I've seen it all through the spectrum that as long as you build a product, something that actually works and it actually does what it's supposed to do, then there's an openness to adopting that. So it's really pragmatism. It's really, they don't want to buy a robot, they want to buy a product.
Yeah, this question reminds me of 2 things. One is there's this event called the Robot Film Festival, and I think I went 6 years ago, and they showed a film from the 1980s that looked like a film I had seen in 2010 or 2015, the robots on the manufacturing line stealing all the jobs, and this was like a 1983 film. So that's a generation ago, and so that narrative has been in place for 40, 50 years, which I think could offer a little perspective on has that narrative actually played out in the past 40 or 50 years when you look at a macro scale. That's my first thought. Second thought, I think of the Roomba, that it was positioned as an appliance. And I know iRobot does their best to make sure it looks like and feels like an appliance. And then, millions and millions of people have a robot in their home of any age because they know it does something pretty useful. So, again, what is this product doing for me and how is it helping in my life? And for younger children, I just see increased adoption across the board of technology.
So I have to go into jobs next, because that's always the pressing issue. My 3 favorite headlines. Robots will destroy our jobs, like the 1983 movie. The sexy burger machine, referring to Creator, won't necessarily steal your job, but can make it better. And my absolute favorite is Japan's robot hotel lays off half the robots after they've created more work for humans. Where are we, Tessa?
I think there's been fear of robots taking jobs for pretty much as long as technology has existed. Before robots, it was software. Before software, it was, like old school automation technology. And that fear has always been with us because we're always afraid of change, right? We get used to our lives, we like doing things the way we do, and we don't want that to be disrupted. And the problem is technology is inherently disruptive. So, I think that question has been around for a really long time. As a technologist, someone who's actually creating that technology, the truth is we don't build technology that replaces people because it's just impossible. I mean, maybe we'll get there someday, maybe in my lifetime, but not now. And so, the only way to make a reasonable business around it is to automate tasks. And jobs are not tasks. Jobs are really complex. They have a lot of thinking involved, they have a lot of judgment and common sense, and those are things that robots don't have yet. And so the question about jobs to me is really, robots and automation are going to come. They're going to encroach upon our lives in various ways, and they're going to take over some of the things mostly things that people don't want to do or dangerous for people to do or, for any other reason is very unpleasant. And so as that happens, what's going to happen next for those people for whom parts of their jobs are being overtaken by robots?
I want to expand on that. Reporters have been asking me this question for 10 years. So the first thing I want to say is about 2 years ago, I gave a talk called When the Robots Don't Work. I gave this talk to a few hundred friends, and a few people said, what, the robots might not work? And I'm like, I never thought of that before. And I'm like, oh, let me tell you all the reasons why the robots are not going to work. It's a long list. I can go into that later. The second reason, though, second thing I want to touch on, which the media is not reporting on, but I have seen LinkedIn videos from World Economic Forum and GE about this issue. Labor scarcity for manual labor and the skills gap for higher paid labor. And what is happening right now, and the reason why Amazon bumped to $15 an hour minimum wage is because they can't find enough warehouse workers willing to work for $8 a wage. And yes, everyone needs a living wage. And I'll say this here, a living wage makes the ROI on robots a lot more appealing if they worked. That part might not happen for a little while. Robotic bin picking is still very difficult. And however, as facilities automate more and more and more, they can't find enough workers to run this automation. And these are high-paying jobs. If you look at the automotive industry, half the automotive line is automated with robots, and tens of thousands of people are running those machines. The assembly half of the line on the automotive, they still can't automate with robots because those tasks are too complex. And they can't find enough workers, and quality standards are going down in places at Toyota in the middle of the country because they can't find enough workers. So I actually view it somewhat of a national crisis, this issue of not finding enough manual labor and the skills gap for technicians and project engineers.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with both of you. And we see this every day, actually. Again, for consumer-facing business, and we actually get this question a lot from our own customers, like, hey, are you guys taking away jobs from baristas? My rejoinder comes in usually two parts. The first part is, come work for us. We are desperately hiring. Whether you're a barista or an engineer, we are hiring at all levels. And the second part of that job, less facetiously, is we're up-leveling the job, right? So we do actually hire a number of former baristas, and what we're doing is we're removing the dull parts of their job, like taking an order, taking a cup, putting it in your machine, pressing two buttons on a machine. I mean, that's not a good job really for any human being, right? You should have the robots do what robots are good at, which are the sort of very monotonous, repetitive tasks requiring high precision, and let humans do the part of the job that humans are good at, which involves communication, talking to other customers, or, communicating, like, how do you use this machine? Maybe, like, holding the camera for them so that they can take a photo for their kids. And then, so for us, like at Cafe X, we actually staff all of our machines intentionally, even though our investors always ask us why. Not because, we need a person to make the coffee, but because we can elevate the entire customer experience by having the person focus on the part of the job that actually requires a human being and have the machine do the rest of it.
Joanne? Well, I'm really interested in this because at the student level, at a way to use robotics to educate and to remove fears, it's really the fact that a lot of what this does is to move more youth worldwide towards STEM education, to break down the barriers that STEM is hard. STEM's not hard, that you need to work by yourself. You don't work by yourself. And there are a lot of complex pieces to this whole thing in order to make one working piece of equipment. And even with that one working piece of equipment, there are humans that are still behind it, helping it move, doing its tasks. So it's refreshing to hear that the confirmation of skilled work, of familiarity, of handling technology is there. So I'm glad I'm involved in this and looking forward to being, continuing to be part of the solution to this whole thing. Another question here?
Yeah, so that's actually, you mentioned
I want to get your opinion on this, the rate of change. Because people say that the rate of change is accelerating, whatever, it's getting more scary. So I guess if you could just give your perspective on the whole panel too, on what you think about it, the rate of change, whether it's increasing, decreasing, that kind of.
I think that's a great question. I do think that the rate of change is increasing. And I actually do think that we as a society are struggling to come to terms with what's happening on the technology front. If you look at what's happening in Washington, I don't think most of the politicians there understand the impact of technology that it's going to have on society, and no one's thinking ahead to what are we going to do about it. I actually do think that that's one of the crises that we're heading towards, is that
And what are the consequences? Nobody knows.
I feel like so I've lived in San Francisco. Technical history. And it, I'm in my mid-30s, I feel like I'm finally witnessing, wisdom or experience. When I moved here in 2009, the smartphone just came out. And, 10 years seems like a long time. But in the past 10 years, we had from zero smartphone, zero mobile app society into now, which I don't want to call it a plateau, but every single app on the planet has been tried in some ways. And you have quotes from Twitter executives that they thought they were building a good thing, and when you go down to it, you kind of loud into people's different biases across a global network. So in some ways, a lot of technology, when we think of social media and apps, is an expansive media for a global conversation, which, because unfortunately we're still human, the human problem of being biased, of being angry, of being revengeful, of being misinformed, all of that amplified in the past 10 years. And it's new territory to sort out how that will play out. That being said, I think we're also witnessing a pendulum swing. That for the future, we're promised better data, more AI, more intelligence, more business intelligence, hopefully better medical, hopefully cheaper medical. There's certain things that are predictable, but there's also certain things that were hyped. Like self-driving cars are not coming anytime soon. At all. Because other things have disrupted my life. So I think what the trends that are common is people are still buying stuff, retail is strong, people still want to spend money on better goods and services, and over the entire world, everybody is increasing in wealth and entering a better, from lower class to middle class. So the whole planet's making more money and more people want to buy things. So I think that's okay.
Just to sort of like quickly touch on that subject, I think there are sort of two components to the answer. One is government and one is business, and what should each entity be responsible for. I think on the government side, continued investment in education is incredibly important. I personally believe in UBI, without getting too much into politics here. But on the business side, I think that there is a responsibility, for corporate America to think about the impact that they're having on the rest of society. So at Cafe X, I actually spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, what can we do to make sure that people who don't have STEM degrees, because a lot of people don't know, I'm a first generation college student, a lot of my family members, are blue collar workers, what types of jobs can be created for those people so that there is a place for them in society where they're not, just entirely dependent on UBI, there is a way for them to also earn their way, into the middle class.
Can I follow up? My question is a little bit built on this. We're talking about robotics, and ultimately machines are leverage, right? It gives humans the lever. The one difference that we are seeing, so I run an voice AI company, and we try to disrupt the contact center. What I see from a social implication is that we are not touching on the intelligence part of it. You mentioned that the robot cannot have the social interaction or give the full experience. But once you add intelligence at the pace that it's going, the AI part of it, and it's very difficult to predict. Is this going to happen in your lifetime, my lifetime? Let's leave that aside. But I think that's the one variable that I would like you guys to touch upon, because that has the real social impact. It's not better robots or faster robots. It's about the more intelligent, the more sensing, because ultimately it's about pattern recognition and about data. And human beings have the ability to recognize patterns and to store data and decide. But in Maslow's pyramid, the only difference is the wisdom part, right? Computers have almost reached that point. And maybe that's the thing that's stopping the self-driving car. Should I kill that one person or two people? That wisdom issue. But can we just touch on that in terms of when the intelligence kicks in and you're almost as intelligent as a human being flipping that burger, what happens next?
So I guess, I don't know if it was necessarily directed at me, but, at a coffee shop, when you're having a conversation, or when the barista actually has time to have a conversation with you, which is also partially why we have our sort of set the way it is, at some point we will treat machines that are pretty difficult. No problem. But happens, I think is still really, really a huge
And even if you were reading emotions right, or I think of that Sophia robot character, they're trying to cross the uncanny valley, but it's super hard to cross. And I think the only people that actually do it well is Pixar films.
When I was working on hotel robots, and I think there's, I don't know what it is, but maybe there's some innate human human emotion for them. And that, I think we don't spend enough
time because government has taken on the role of ensuring that we're safe.
Yeah, I would love opinions on what
I'd say, I've been there to Vietnam or Malaysia. Are setting up factories in Africa. So these are just
How do you define a robot? So depending on how you define a robot, conditioning. I think there was an article, actually there was a huge issue a year or so ago around climate change and how, one of the biggest negotiations, country to country was the fact that there was this, huge rising middle class in India and other developing countries where people now have access to air conditioning for the first time because now they're actually rich enough to have an air conditioner, and there's probably improvements in the technology at this point where you can have a sort of smart air conditioners that adjust temperature based off of what's going on in the sort of ambient room temperature. So depending on how you define robotics, there's probably a lot of things that can happen in developing and sort of emerging countries that we sort of take for granted already, but is technically a robot and is going to become very, very popular and prevalent in those countries.
So in the early days of the ATM machine, there were these people who were like ATM assistants, ATM attendants, and they'd sit outside and they'd say, this is how it works. No, it hasn't glitched. You haven't lost your money. And it seems like we're in that phase with a lot of robotics today. And yes, they're glitchy sometimes. They mess up, but eventually those attendants went away. Eventually, we just started walking up to these ATMs on the side of the building and saying, I'm just going to take out $20. I'm curious about something specifically that Cynthia mentioned, the concept of UBI, the concept of, okay, eventually Eventually we get it right, eventually these things work all the time, repeatedly. Does society then need to step in and say, okay, the robots are already doing everything, or they're doing a significant portion. Should we then support people just for being human?
I mean, you already know my answer. But I actually love the ATM example because you're right. The attendants originally, and if you think about what the ATMs were supposed to do, it was actually replacing some of the roles of bank tellers, right, who were sort of dispensing cash. And now what you see instead when you go to a bank, whenever actually people go to banks, is you're going there for other services. You're going there for investment advice or how to set up a trust or what have you. So in the context of what we're doing at Cafe X, yes, there are people there to explain the technology. What we're hoping to be able to achieve at some point is an experience almost akin to a sommelier. So when you go to a nice restaurant, you have sommeliers, highly trained in all these different types of wine, and can recommend the right wine for the right food that you're eating, and explain the region and the terroir and all that. It's not you guys stand at the counter asking someone about the origin of 5 different coffees and have them explain it to you while there's 10 people in line behind you, right? So, we'd like to be able to elevate that entire experience. I think there'll still be, those types of roles available. That said, I mean, yeah, I believe in UBI.
I'll answer a slightly different question, but I think it's very related, which is if I were to give someone advice on, like a high school student graduating on net right now, about what professions to go into, here's my list. Massage therapy, hairdressers, like stylists, and entrepreneurs. Art, maybe. It's unclear to me whether we're actually going to be able to fund that, but anything creative is not. Not just because I am one, but because I think there's always going to be opportunities to create more value. Even in a world where everything is automated, there's still friction. There are still unmet needs. There might be needs that people have that they don't realize they have yet. And that is the essence of being able to create new businesses and create new value. And I think if I were to recommend one thing to a kid right now, be an entrepreneur.
I have a slightly different answer. So as much as I want UBI to happen, the thousands of companies who can't find enough manual labor will block it politically. Because, I mean, for example, the warehousing industry has a 1 million person labor shortage, and we take the logistics industry for granted, but literally our economy rides on that. Everything you're buying has so much infrastructure behind it, it's insanely maddening and fascinating. So UBI won't happen if companies are struggling to get enough workers to run their businesses. That being said, I would love to see political incentive for people who want to be caregiving with each other. I think as a society, I don't necessarily need to be, it doesn't need to be a stay-at-home mom and a working dad family. But, if you're an individual who wants to take care of your parents, or your sister because you're aging together, or the dad wants to stay at home, I would love to see incentive for people to be caregiving for each other. Because we have this huge issue with having enough caregivers for the elderly, and if you're a working mom and you have to pay daycare and take care of your mom, you're just kind of, you're just screwed. And so I would love to see at least that angle get resolved so we can be human to each other again. On the flip side, I think of a company like Intel. Don't quote me on this number, but I think like 100,000 people work at Intel and not a single human hand touches the product because that's how fabs work. So I think to say that robots are going to take all the jobs is to grossly misunderstand industry. There's a lot of roles, and the thing is, no kid I'm only talking about the people who might get through a
So I think it's interesting that the robot apocalypse has been like the total clickbait, which I'm always reading, and because it's Skynet and Elon Musk and military, but there's so many robot malfunctions, and robotics companies are dying. So when you one of the reasons, like the one robot that killed itself in the pond, it was kind of like, God, what a bummer, what a bad day. And I can't help it. So does that impact your progress in robotics? And the same holds true, do companies that are failing in robots, because we've lost Rethink and Mayfield and so are these, what are your thoughts on robot malfunction? How does it impact you? I agree that those autonomous vehicles are far away, because I don't think that we're all losing our jobs tomorrow. So, any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's great from a hiring perspective. So basically every single time, I hear about, whether it's a robotics company or just any sort of tech company generally that is not doing too well, I just start reaching out to people who work there, like, hey, do you want to work for us instead? Or some things weren't going that great in your company. So there are very burned by previous investments, and they may be a little bit gun shy. For the sake of building a robot, you're actually trying to solve a real user need, and you're building something that's actually going to deliver concrete value to the end user.
I think there was this big hype cycle in robotics, and I think there was a lot of money that flowed into it on just on the people are very excited about it's going to be one step at a time. I'm not sure a social robot is actually going to help us that much.
Whitney Brooks here, and Rod is recovering. He's a sweet guy. Roddy Brooks, who started it. He invented the category of collaborative robotics from a PR perspective. Robotics press, which was cult of personality, which was a PR campaign. And the more PR campaigns I've done, the more I realize just how you can kind of mold reality for a little while if you're there's just pure luck that we used some reporters and got on the cover of the New York Times. So, and then the same thing happened again with all the Google acquisitions. Problems to solve there, and because everybody loves e-commerce, it's kind of an obvious fit. So there are some markets that say it's not about the robot specifically, it's about the industry it's going into, and are they ready to buy, and do they have specific metrics for which they're looking for? Can you ask them, hey, if the robot does this, will you buy it for this price? Be very concrete about it. And just one little quick thing about Jibo, they were not a better Amazon Alexa or Echo or Siri or anything. So they were just a moving tablet with a worse off voice system. And they overpromised. Everyone who watched the Kickstarter video knew that wasn't possible.
Oh, please. So get somebody. Go ahead.
Hi. So I know this may be far down the line from now, but I'm curious about how you mentioned that robots can sense and they act on those senses. So in terms of that, how do you think a robot will respond if it senses that it's being mistreated, if that's even possible? And who will set those ethical implications?
I'll take that. I think there was a Wall Street Journal article, or sorry, New York Times article about people abusing our hotel robots. We have a lot of that. It turns out when you work in a hotel and you deploy a product in there, you think it's a nice, clean, safe environment. It's not. You get wedding guests, you get drunk people, you get people, you get kids who are like, I'm sorry, but we had to design a robot that could actually handle the abuse. And one of the takeaways that I took from that is that we as technologists ended up looking at how our product was received in the world and designing it to cope with those abuses. And just imagine, think of it as a psychologist, coaching a kid or something who grew up in an abusive household. Well, you develop coping strategies. And that's what we program into our robots. We program coping strategies, which is a really sad indictment of our society today, that that's how we treat our robots. And therefore, that's how we program them to deal with their environment. So I think it's more of a reflection on us about how do we treat the things in our environment, from our kids to our spouses to our pets to our robots, rather than a robot issue.
I want to talk about a market. We go to Joanne, we'll open it up. I personally had 2 robot-assisted surgeries, and you have a lot of knowledge in the healthcare world. How are robotics working? Who's buying? Is this one of the markets that really matter? And where are the robot malfunctions killing the market?
So this is all about a product fit, because of the drives in a very big industry called healthcare to control costs, and there are a lot of different levers. Smaller incision. What can you do through the smaller incision? You got to use some kind of intelligence as you go in there and do surgery. So it's really very much cost driven. Knee, open heart, however you want to call it, but the robot was there really for the hospital economics. No. So,
funny anecdote about that. San Francisco Health Department makes us install a 3-compartment sink within, arm's reach of all of our. It is the law, therefore we comply.
Exactly. So the laws don't keep up. There's just no way. There's always going to be that influence that our regulated world that we live in will not keep up with what the technology can do. And so things look slow. Things always look slow, except some consumer electronics, but otherwise those failures are devastating to the overall growth of those kinds of technologies. A great example is there's a lot of 3D printing that's happening. People at home can make a 3D part in their garage. Well, the materials have gotten sophisticated enough that you make dental fillings, bones, lots of prosthetics. The 3D printing, but controlling that, knowing that it's safe, knowing that it's a safe and effective product, it's really a challenge.
So for the biggest challenges for robotics companies, we've talked about product market fit, we've talked about regulations. You're going to be growing soon, all 3 of you working in companies, manufacturing at scale. Challenges there? You're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, we were just talking about this a little bit earlier. For us, it's a little bit of the tension between, do we want to manufacture at scale right now, or do we want to continue iterating on our product? For example, we could roll out 100, copies of our latest generation of our machine, but then we have to support 100 copies of that machine when we could continue to iterate on the product. So I think that's definitely a challenge for us, is just trying to figure out which version of the product is that we actually want to go out to market with. And then, on top of that, making sure that both government and consumers are educated about our product and understand what it can and can't do and what is reasonable and not reasonable. So, for example, we would really like to not have to install sinks near all of our machines.
I'll follow on with that because we had the same problem. So at Savio, we had maybe 100 robots in the field, and we had thousands of unique configurations of hardware and software. How do you support that? That was our biggest challenge, which is when you look at scaling up a robotics business, there's always pressure to get something out into the world to prove product market fit early, and that means you have product in the field, operational, probably on a service contract, like 24/7 operation, and you got to keep it going as you develop your next product. And so when do you stop and redesign the next version? Well, you can't, because you're a service company, you're constantly providing this thing which people are continuing to use because it's a revenue stream and you've got a product out in the market and you want to keep that momentum going. And one of the biggest challenges we had was trying to strategize, when do you actually spend that engineering effort to build V2 and then V3? And the mistake we made was just kind of incrementally bolting parts on to try to keep patching things. And that's what gives you a Frankenstein fleet.
Yeah, there's two thoughts. One is robots, when you have AI or real-time vision involved in it, or there's always continuous improvement. So you need that much, and then use it and train it, and then it gets better, and it gets better. But it doesn't really do that much, so you have to first find a pilot customer. Place a few units, have it learn, have it grow in capacity, and then you scale. They're talking about having multiple units with different builds on it. I heard a story from a startup that had an unhackathon. So they different prototypes with slightly different builds, and this new VP of engineering, the hardware guy, came in and said, "We're having an unhackathon. Stop everything. We're going to make these 10 units exactly the same, and it's going to be boring and consistent and repeatable." And this also, I run another. Unless you've actually worked as a mechanical engineer, I'm mechanical, you have no idea what they're doing. Please don't pretend you know what they're doing. And manufacturing needs to be very standardized, where you want, like I tell robotics companies, before you even, well, you could be choosing your contract manufacturer or working with them at the same time, but until you have your own design quality to your product performance specs on 20 or 30 or 50 different units, depending on what kind of lot size, I'm talking like a lot size of a few hundred or thousands, the manufacturer can't help you. But if you can have your own repeatable prototype design internally, then your CM can help make that repeatable across hundreds or thousands more units. And a lot of them don't understand this. And one of my favorite topics is, at that time, that Kickstarter ruined my life. Because then they're building in garages and doing all these things like on their own. So
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring the conversation a bit back to the regulatory and policy. You mentioned the different instances where policy is failing because policymakers aren't educated enough. Hindering innovation because of just laws that are completely misaligned. So clearly there's a gap, but how do you solve that gap? How do you create, systems for this dialogue and this exchange to happen in a way for it to happen one day?
So I had a funny quote last week, which, regulation can slow things down, but regulation is in some ways, people are only going to buy automation if they're incentivized by insurance or taxes or OSHA. So OSHA is placing a lot more rules on construction workers. Having robots inspect oil and gas facilities and refineries. So it's this funny line between, you know, where's the incentive coming from?
What question was it? The same. Of trash after this. And my question is about what about recycling after this?
For speed reasons, as well as, you know, sort of, it wasn't actually intentionally an environmental reason, but it's more of a cost saving and sort of plays into environmental sort of output as well. We built our machine almost entirely modularly, where you can sort of easily swap components in and out. It was a little bit of a hardware hack because we were trying to iterate on our machine without having to go through really, really long manufacturing cycles. And the easiest way to do that was to build a machine that could easily change its parts. So when we do go through V1, I mean, we have 3 versions of the machine on the market right now, V1, V1.5, V2. Like V1 and 1.5 actually share a lot of parts, like even their shell is the same. The internal parts for like, you know, V1 and V2, like they also share a lot of components. So there is actually a decent amount of recycling. It wasn't intended for that reason, but it was sort of a software cycles.
Two-part question. The first one is very serious. Do you agree Ex Machina is the best robotics movie ever made?
No.
Yes, no?
No.
Oh, come on. Ravi? Thank you. Okay, what's holding robotics back? I've been watching this space for 30 years. In that time, cloud computing's taken over. These phones have taken over in the last 30 years. Is it hardware? Is it the AI? Is it social acceptance?
Hate to name it makes things harder for those of us who are actually trying to build real product.
Componentized, that will change, but right now that's still
tasks. There's a physics limitation that are fast enough to whack someone in the quote unquote safer. It takes a long time.
Same. intelligent product, an intelligent system.
I just want to draw to the Morovic's paradox, where easiest things are the hardest for the machine, and hardest things are the easiest ones, right? So, I could read an MRI very easily, and with a lot more accuracy these days by throwing in a lot of data. But if I were to build a robot to say, replace a waiter or something similar, and that's the hardest part, because from the time they pick the food to the time they deliver or place the food on somebody's table, there are thousands of decisions, and there are a lot more variabilities that would happen. And as a human, we have this common sense and a lot more intuition. And what's really frustrating for me as an engineer who's been building robots is this whole alarmist attitude, right? People have it, oh, robots are going to take over. Oh, this is going to take over. Come on, just forget about all of that and place a lot more time and energy into building these technologies, make that work first before even throwing water on something. And I'd really love to hear your opinion on that, because it's really frustrating.
Sensationalized, but one of the careers Tessa didn't list is radiologist, and so I think they're done, because I think that AI is going to outdo that. But if you have any other comments about his question.
It reminds me of something I've been thinking about. I think the robots are being scapegoated for much larger problems. It's like a bomb is going off, and we're screaming at the kids shooting off firecrackers. It's just not relevant to what the real problems are in this world, and it's a distraction methodology. Anyone who basically screams out robots steal jobs, in my mind, is just misinformed and lazy. There's economics, there's education, there's global economy, there's reshoring, there's political agendas, there's misinformation. It frustrates me as well.
Robot cut my hair.
I wouldn't either. I like my stylist. She's an artist,
I know we don't have a lot more time, right, Robbie? We have another question? Okay, good. Because I have my last question I have to do. Okay, good.
Hi, thank you. This is great. My question was, are any of your companies collaborating with Carnegie Mellon or the ARM Institute there? And what has been your experience?
I'm talking to ARM Institute about applying and having one of my clients join. I'm very excited about what they're doing.
Mostly just from a hiring perspective.
Cynthia has the challenge nailed in terms of recruiting for a robotics company. Clearly, you've got it down.
I spend most of my time trying to find people.
Because I hear other companies, they make their senior roboticists change their titles on LinkedIn so they don't get poached by Cafe X and Cafe X. Anybody else working with Carnegie Mellon? Does anyone else have questions? Another question? Oh. Come on in.
Thank you guys for your insight. For me, as an investor, I see a lot of traction on the industrial side, like dusty robots, right? FAX and hotel robots you guys are talking about. But for consumers, I feel like there's not much adoption. It's great in movies, but people are not really buying it. What do you guys think are the reasons? Is it because price is too high, like the Sony dock, right? Or, I don't know, there's not smart enough, like Alexa. So do you guys think it's going to be the last market to take off? Just wonder what your opinions are.
I think it really just goes back to, again, what problem are consumer robots trying to solve, right? Are they trying to solve a convenience problem? Are they trying to solve a companionship loneliness problem? What exactly is it actually that they're trying to solve for? And I think some of the sort of more high-profile failures in that space are partially because they didn't actually clearly identify what they were actually trying to solve for, what value were they actually trying to deliver to their users.
I think that the way we will see robotics technology enter the home is through things that aren't robots. Well, I call them robots. You would not call them robots. There are things like our home assistants that can turn on and off the lights by voice, right? You've seen that. You probably have one. Is that a robot? I don't know, but it's performing the same functions that you might want a robot to do. And, you know, I could imagine all sorts of, if you take the technology that we've got today, the trajectory and the components that we have, you can build smarter and smarter products that respond to voice, that can reconfigure themselves and can take action in the environment based on inputs and sensors. And they might be called furniture or appliances and not robots.
I got a screening deal on my dishwasher 2 months ago, so Joanne?
I want my refrigerator to talk to me and give me my grocery list. I haven't been that involved in consumer electronics at all. You know, the sales side of things that I've seen have been in the medical space, and again, it's all been driven from an economic side.
So I would be remiss not to ask a question like this in January and after CES. Predictions? 5 years. I mean, this, how cliche, I couldn't do it, right? For that. So predictions and what happened at CES that was impressive or not. Cynthia?
I'm a huge introvert, so CES was very overwhelming for me. I don't think I ever want to go again unless I have to speak there. But yeah, no, I like the bread bot. I thought those guys were pretty cool. They're based up in not quite Seattle, like a couple hours outside Seattle. But you know, fresh bread. Who doesn't love that? You know, predictions. I would be remiss to say, not to say rather, you know, Cafe X on every other block, just like you would see at Starbucks.
Saving time with delicious coffee. I'm all for it.
Better, faster, cheaper.
The bread bot was delicious. And I'm again, a little bit cynical walking around the robotics area of CES. I'm pretty sure half of them will be there next year, and I wonder why they're at CES in the first place. Like, they're not really consumer priced about the consumer robot in the home thing. I'm a big fan of smart home IoT stuff. But, you know, if your average American family spends $700 on Christmas, and with a really expensive robotic toy, they're just not going to do that. On the other flip side, though, there's this thing in the US called the play gap. The play gap, where rich kids can play with STEM toys and robots and educational kits, and most poor kids cannot because they cost too much. And I advocate, if you're ever donating during the holidays a gift to like Salvation Army or somebody, donate a STEM toy. That's kind of my PSA. I think we need to resolve that as a culture.
I'm focused on building my business.
So your prediction, 5 years, you're going to be at every construction site.
5 years from now, construction is going to be partially automated.
Partial. What are the critical parts of construction that will be automated? The most dangerous?
So
because it's one of the most dangerous industries, right? We have the highest fatality rates in construction.
Sure. So on money today, I just came from the construction side. I spent the morning doing a demo out there, starting to get our product out into the field. And it's actually really wet outside, if you haven't noticed. The site we're on has 1,500 people on a daily basis coming together into a single site, wielding power tools on their hands and knees, just doing construction. It's going to take a while for that to be more automated, but I think because of the labor shortages and all of that, we have to address this problem. This is the reason I'm in this industry in the first place, is because houses are getting more expensive, we don't have enough people to make them, and we need some kind of automation to actually fix it. So, you know, my vision is my company, a bunch of other companies in the same space as mine, trying to take some of that labor that we can't find people to do and actually automate with robots so that we can get housing and make it more affordable.
Joanne. So I'm going to speak about healthcare, and in 10 years from now,
Fine. I didn't put a timeline on it.
there'll be more control of your own health information and your ability to diagnose yourself.
So I think my prediction is going to be on venture investing is going to come back in this space significantly. And I think somebody made a comment in our conversations that there are going to be a lot of robotics companies because all I need is like a sensor and an actuator, right? and some hardware. I think they're going to try to hack through it like all the GoFundMe campaigns kind of like completely flamed out. Do people have any other questions?
A few here.
Yes, great.
If I may ask one for my friend.
Please.
What we didn't talk about is software robots. And so if you take kind of like Bank of America, 300,000 people, a lot of people believe that 15 years from now, there's going to be 30,000 people. And because the 300,000 people are not bankers, they're people in business processes who are doing fairly sort of mundane, but these are not physical jobs. That's kind of, they're doing mental or intellectual jobs. And a lot of that is handled by BPOs today, where the training people get is for a week or 2 weeks, and they're able to do the jobs. And so in areas like intelligent process automation, business process automation, what do you think about that kind of version of robots?
Yeah, so before I got into robots, I was working on software automation. It's coming. I think the interesting thing there is there's still which business processes should be automated, how should they be automated, how do they interface with the rest of the company? And so I think there's still some opportunity there. But yeah, that's, robots are coming, and they're coming in software too.
Hi. I saw the CAFEX robot, and I thought it was pretty cool. The robot arm is kind of...
Location.
I watched your friend's video, he went there, I'm not sure which location. Watching the arm kind of go forward and just the way back, there's kind of humanistic user experience. I thought that was really cool, but also from an outside perspective, it seems like something that could just work inside of a black box, maybe no robot arm at all. And almost at the point, it would just be like a vending machine. You wouldn't need to call a robot, you probably wouldn't even need distinct specs to it. And it kind of seems like you have this trade-off of sort of public, I'm not using it in a negative way, but public theatrics and user experience and humanistic perception compared to just pure functionality, or even some you're trading in some actual functionality for that. So, do you feel that that kind of public perception and the sort of theatrics part of it is a good trade-off for those kinds of things, for example, for functionality?
Yeah, and I think it depends on how you define functionality, right? So again, this goes back to what is the problem we're actually trying to solve for the user. So in the case of CafeX, what we're actually looking at is the sort of larger cafe market. So when you go to a traditional cafe, what is the very first problem, the very first pain point that you encounter when you walk in?
The line. Where do you go to order?
Yeah, the line, right? You walk into a cafe, very first pain point, there's a line, there's like one cashier, 2 cashiers max, never more than that. There's always that one guy in front of the line. He's been in line the whole time, gets to the front of the line, takes 5 minutes to decide if he wants a latte or a cappuccino. So that's the very first pain point that we're trying to solve for by decoupling that ordering process from the production process. The next is the production process, which is around sort of precision and repeatability and sort of consistent quality. But part of it is that you can't actually speed it up that much more, right? Espresso extraction is going to take however long it's going to take. There's only so much more that you can sort of speed that up. And then so what can you do around the human perception of time to improve the user experience there? And so what we found is that one of the ways to improve the human perception of time, because espresso extraction is still going to take the same amount of time without impeding on the product quality, is that you distract people. Quite literally, it's a distraction. Human beings are attracted to moving things. They like to be entertained. It is more fun to be entertained by a moving robot arm than staring into your phone or staring into the abyss for 30 seconds or a minute, which is actually very, very long. A minute is a very long time when you have nothing to do. So that's the second pain point that we're solving for, both the quality of the product itself, but also that human perception of the time it takes to make that product, which we can only speed up by so much. And then there's some other pain points around the pickup process, belonging to the same name, they have the wrong product, things like that.
Maybe time for 2 questions and then go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, yeah, I have 2 quick comments and 1 question. I think there is going to be a huge problem about how human treated the robots. I watched the movie our TV show Westworld, and basically how you treat the robotic hosts, and then also Waymo, their driverless car, they have a security driver basically protect the cars from people kind of breaking the LiDAR and stuff, not really sitting on the driver's seat. And my question is on the privacy. So I don't think that we travel to the uncanny human valley that much. So you have Alexa, you have like iRobots, which you don't think they're actually interface are human. So you actually say things, and there's news about Alexa actually record your conversation, and probably iRobot when they like clean your house, they can record your routine and stuff. So how do you solve that problem about privacy, and eventually the machine probably they will have more knowledge about yourself than like the closest people to you?
I think one of the answers from a technological perspective is that we're moving towards doing more compute at the edge, which means that the devices that you have are going to be able to do vision on board, you know, using the chips on board that device without sending your data to the cloud, you know, and possibly violating your privacy. So as vision gets better, I think that's one of the ways in which technology can address that problem.
I think I'm so much more pragmatic about a lot of these things. I think the consumer has to decide that it's not worth it. So for, you know, as long as we continue to purchase these products where we're giving up our data completely voluntarily, companies will continue to make them. So if we actually care about our own privacy, then we need to start putting our money where our mouth is.
We'll have a last question.
Thank you very much for your insights. That was really interesting. And one of the things that was most interesting to me is how unhappy you all seem to be about the public discussion about robots. And that was actually a bit surprising for me, because when I came, I saw it's mostly people from your ladies from business. I thought, oh, this might be a little bit one-sided. It wasn't at all. Now my final question to you is, what do you think should happen that our public discussion about robots, our discussion about robots as a society is more balanced than you perceive it right now? What is needed for that?
Well, regarding industrial robots, the reason why I'm in the industrial robot space after playing around with some telepresence and consumer devices, if the system works for the right price, they buy it. It doesn't matter what the public is saying. It's very simple. And also, if you go speak with the employees of those facilities, the robot is doing the dull, dirty, dangerous aspects of their job. Almost no company lays anyone off. They're all upskilled, and some of them are getting paid more money. So we need more, like, it might not be evangelizing it, but I just think the more these robots are in people's places of work and are being helpful, and the more it's normalized. If we keep having sci-fi movies, it won't get normalized so quickly. But, you know, let's, yeah, in a way, like let's talk about what these things are actually doing and how it impacts business.
I think it's the same when eBay first came out and you always thought you were getting ripped off, or going to renting out your house on Airbnb, thought everyone would trash it. Right now, the press is sensationalizing a lot of it, in my opinion. The first thing a robotics company has to be prepared to answer is jobs. And then how will it be used nefariously, and what are the safeguards in it? And these products are not bad products, right? They're actually well engineered, and they're not products yet, I know. But they're getting to be products.
We need better press.
I think the press, there will be a tipping point where the clickbait won't be as sensational. Right now, it's sort of like Donald Trump, because anytime there's an article of Melania's shoes, it gets 15 million clicks in the first minute, and the media makes money. So the media is making money by talking about any failure or the Kiwi robots caught on fire at Berkeley, right? And so this is all like the biggest news. It's like, yeah, this happens, this is not that big of a deal, right? If you think about how many cars fail versus a robot, right? It's not that big of a deal, but it becomes sensationalized, and it's the same way that the killer robots of Russia and China are all going to kill us, right? It's like, they're not. They can't even deliver a pizza on Berkeley campus yet. So we're not there. That's what my opinion is. It's like I think a lot of it is stoked by Luddites and the media for clicks.
Closing thoughts.
Well, I have had, this is like the highlight of my career, sitting on a panel with 4 women that have a lot of degrees and are experts in robotics, et cetera. So I really want to thank these panelists because I think they're exceptional, and I think this is exemplary and part of what Silicon Valley has to offer for women in technology. I want to thank the audience for coming here. I know it's been terrible weather, and so that usually, I thought no one was going to come because of the weather. And so I thank you all, and I think you can probably meet some of the roboticists and healthcare executives afterwards as well. So thank you very much.
Please join me in giving a big hand. I'd like to thank SwissNex and our friend Emina and Margot for hosting us today. If you see any trash around your chair, we would really appreciate if you can pick it up. It'll save us some trouble. And anything else? And thank you to the audience for